tonight in this podcast, there is this this quiet reality to the things we leave behind. A gift card just sort of tucked into the back fold of a wallet, waiting for a special occasion that never quite arrives.
Yeah.
Or a final paycheck that gets mailed to an old apartment and is just sitting in a pile of forwarded mail that somehow never actually catches up to your new address.
Right. It just sits there.
Exactly. Or like a rebate check from some long-forgotten purchase.
Yeah.
Quietly expiring in the dark of a kitchen drawer. We leave these small fragments of our lives behind, not out of any real intent, but just out of the sheer momentum of living. They sit in this stillness, suspended in time, completely disconnected from the people who hold the actual right to them.
It really is a profound sort of stillness to consider, because we tend to think of value, especially financial value, as something that is inherently active.
Right, like it's always moving.
Yeah. Exactly. We picture it as a force that moves, that is spent, that's saved, that's tracked by these massive algorithms with incredible precision. The general assumption is just that money is always doing something.
Right.
But there is this entirely other ecosystem, a sort of, a shadow economy almost, that's made up entirely of inertia.
A shadow economy inertia, I like that.
Yeah, it's the space where momentum just stops, where a transaction is initiated but it's never completed. And that incomplete state, it creates this massive ripple effect that touches everything from corporate accounting ledgers all the way to state infrastructure.
Well, our mission for this deep dive today is to map out that exact ripple effect. We're looking at a huge stack of sources, legal handbooks from state controllers, historical wikis that trace medieval property law, incredibly detailed corporate accounting guidelines, and even a really complex recent United States Supreme Court ruling.
Get a lot of material.
It is. And we're going to take all of this and use it to understand this hidden, centuries-old life cycle of forgotten money. We want to look at the massive, quiet machinery that society has built to process these abandoned fragments.
Right.
But more importantly, we want to look at what that machinery reveals about our own human nature, and how our systems actually accommodate the friction of our daily lives.
The scale of that machinery is really what makes this so compelling, because we are talking about billions of dollars constantly flowing through these bureaucratic networks that are designed specifically to catch what falls through the cracks of human attention.
Billions.
Billions. But to really understand the macro level stuff, the Supreme Court battles and the state revenues, we have to start at the micro level first. We have to look at the exact moment the value is dropped.
Let's start there then. I want to ground this in a highly relatable scenario that was actually pulled directly from our sources. There's this human resources and payroll brief titled, Take Special Care with Uncashed Paychecks. Sure. Picture an employee moving out of town for a new job. They're packing boxes, they're canceling utilities, trying to manage the logistics of a moving truck, just saying their goodbyes. It's chaos.
Moving always is.
Right. And they leave a forwarding address with their former employer, but in the sheer chaos of that transition, the final paycheck just gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
Maybe the postal service makes a routing error. Or maybe it gets mixed in with like junk mail and promotional catalogs and is thrown away by accident. A year passes.
Yeah.
That piece of paper is just sitting somewhere, entirely uncashed.
It happens so much more often than you'd think.
I'm sure it does. Or, to bring it to a different kind of asset, imagine a physical plastic gift card. You receive it as a holiday gift, and you slide it into a drawer, thinking, I'll save this for a moment when I really need a treat.
The someday treat.
Exactly.
Right.
But your routines change. You totally forget it's there. And 3 years later, it's still sitting in that drawer holding $40 of invisible, unused value.
And from an administrative and an accounting side, those two scenarios create a really fascinating dilemma, because the company that issued that final paycheck or the retailer that sold that gift card, they know the transaction is incomplete.
Because they can see the money?
Right. Their bank account hasn't been debited for the paycheck. They see that cash just sitting there on their ledger. They are holding value that fundamentally does not belong to them, but the person it does belong to has essentially vanished from their immediate view.
I was thinking about this dynamic earlier, and I had this analogy come to mind. If you are sitting on a park bench, reading a physical book, and you accidentally leave that book behind when you walk away, the book doesn't just cease to exist.
It's still there.
It sits there on the wood, weathering the elements. Eventually, someone else comes along and picks it up and changes hands physically. But with money, especially digital money, or an uncashed check sitting in a landfill, there is no physical park bench.
Right.
There is no physical object to weather the rain. So when the owner walks away, who actually picks it up? Like, where does the value reside while it waits?
The park bench is a really helpful way to visualize physical abandonment, but we have to adjust it slightly for the digital and financial reality. With an uncashed check, it's more like a phantom limb on a corporate balance sheet.
A phantom limb.
Yeah, because the money hasn't physically been left anywhere,
Right.
right? The corporation's bank account still has the actual cash. What has been left behind is the right to claim that cash.
Oh, interesting.
And from the perspective of the business and the law, that right, that value, it cannot just evaporate into the ether. It has to go somewhere.
It can't just exist in a permanent void.
It cannot. The legal system absolutely abhors a vacuum of ownership.
Hmm.
To understand how society handles this vacuum, we really need to define a few core concepts from our accounting sources.
Let's do that.
Because there is a tendency for people to just group all lost value together, but the business world categorizes it very specifically. So let's look at two terms that are often conflated but operate under completely different rules: shrinkage and breakage.
Okay, the source material makes a really hard distinction between these two.
Yeah,
Let's explore shrinkage first, because I feel like that one is a bit more intuitive.
it is. Shrinkage is a concept most consumers are at least, tangentially familiar with. In retail or manufacturing or inventory management, shrinkage refers to physical items that are lost from a company's inventory.
Like stolen goods.
Exactly. They are goods that the company purchased or produced, but which cannot be sold to a customer because they've just disappeared. So physical theft, shoplifting, damage in transit, or even just simple administrative counting errors.
Okay.
Like a pallet of electronics gets backed into by a forklift and destroyed, or a sweater is stolen from a rack. That is shrinkage.
So the physical item is gone, and the company simply has to absorb the financial loss of having produced or bought that item. It's just a negative mark on their ledger.
It's a pure loss. The company spent money to acquire the asset, and they get zero return. Breakage, however, which is the other term, is the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
Breakage.
Right. Breakage, particularly in accounting and telecommunications terminology, refers to any type of service or monetary value which is paid for by a customer but goes unused by that customer.
So like the gift card.
Exactly. The sources provide the classic historical example of prepaid calling cards from the 1990s, alongside modern retail gift cards. A customer walks into a store, pays $50 for a gift card. The company receives $50 in actual cash right then and there.
But then the card goes into the drawer.
Right. The customer puts it in a drawer and never redeems it. That unredeemed value, the $50 sitting on the ledger, is breakage.
And reading through the financial analysis of breakage in the sources, it becomes incredibly clear that this is just wildly lucrative for the issuing businesses.
Oh, it is remarkably profitable. The revenue from breakage is recognized by the company without them ever having to provide the corresponding goods or services.
Why?
Yeah, they receive the cash up front, but because you forgot the card, the company never had to manufacture a product to give you. They never had to pay for the shipping of that product or, pay the hourly wage of the employee to ring up the final sale.
It's pure profit,
It represents a 100% margin on that unredeemed amount.
which introduces a rather complex incentive structure into the marketplace, doesn't it? A corporation inherently benefits from your forgetfulness. The quieter a customer is, the more the company profits from the breakage.
The financial incentive definitely leans heavily toward hoping the customer forgets. But the legal system recognizes this imbalance.
Right.
In the case of modern gift cards, many U.S. states have actually introduced specific unclaimed property laws and consumer protection statutes to ensure that companies cannot simply design products with hidden expiration dates to artificially accelerate that breakage.
So they can't just force you to forget.
Exactly. They cannot indefinitely keep those unused balances without eventually accounting for them. And this brings us back to our first scenario, the uncashed payroll check.
Right. The person moving.
Yes, because unlike a retail gift card, an uncashed paycheck is absolutely not breakage. It falls into a different category entirely. It is a liability.
The human resources brief we are referencing is so adamant about this distinction. An uncashed paycheck is not a sudden windfall of free money for the employer, no matter how long it sits there uncashed.
That distinction is vital. It represents a hard, unyielding reality for corporate accounting departments. I mean, an employer might look at their outstanding checklist at the end of the year and think, well, the employee moved away. They never cashed this $1,000 check. It's been 12 months. I'll just go into the accounting software, void the check, and sweep those funds back into our general operating account.
On a surface level,
Hmm.
to someone untrained in accounting law, that sounds like basic bookkeeping. Just cleaning up the outstanding items and reconciling the accounts.
It looks like housekeeping. But our sources point out that executing that sweep is a severe legal and tax violation.
Really, a severe violation.
Absolutely. Doing this illegally understates the company's total wages paid. And it creates this massive domino effect of errors. It messes with federal and state employment taxes. It alters Social Security contributions and Medicare withholding records.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the tax implications of that.
It touches everything. The fundamental fact is this. Just because a check remains uncashed over a long period of time, the company's liability for that payment is not eliminated. The company owes that money.
Right, the labor was done.
Exactly. The employee performed the labor and earned the wage. The liability remains anchored to the company's ledger.
So the company is effectively trapped by their own money. They have the cash in their bank account. They know it legally belongs to the former employee, but they obviously can't force the employee to, walk into a bank and cash a piece of paper.
Right.
And they are legally barred from absorbing the money back into their profits. So the value is just locked in this holding pattern.
It is a permanent holding pattern from the company's perspective.
Wow.
The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the AICPA, provides strict guidelines for this.
What do they tell them to do?
They suggest companies move these outstanding funds into tightly controlled escrow or suspense accounts to completely separate them from operating cash.
Okay, so walling it off.
Yes. And they mandate that the company must continue trying to contact the payee at regular intervals, and they must rigorously preserve all the data identifying the rightful owner.
But they can't just hold it forever, right?
Exactly. Even with those safeguards, the company cannot keep the money forever. A private corporation is not a bank, and it cannot act as a permanent vault for lost funds. This legal dead end is where the central mechanism of our deep dive comes into play. The system requires a release valve.
A release valve.
Yes, and that release valve is called escheatment.
Escheatment. It is a heavy, dense word. It doesn't sound like modern financial jargon at all. It sounds ancient.
The weight of the word definitely comes from its age. Escheatment is the legal process by which abandoned or unclaimed property is transferred to the state.
Okay.
The underlying philosophy addresses the exact tension we discussed with your park bench analogy. Property cannot exist indefinitely without an owner. If the rightful owner cannot be located after a legally specified period of time, the rights to that property do not simply evaporate into nothingness.
Right, the void.
Right. And crucially, those rights do not revert to the private company that just happens to be holding the funds. Instead, the rights are transferred to the sovereign. The state steps in to hold it.
So to carry that analogy forward, the state becomes the designated entity that walks through the park, picks up the forgotten book off the bench, and places it in a public repository for safekeeping.
Exactly. The state removes it from the elements and catalogs it, waiting for the reader to return.
When looking through the historical wikis provided in our sources, the timeline of this concept is just staggering. We are discussing the handling of digital gift cards, electronic funds transfers, corporate accounting software today. But the foundational mechanism for handling this abandoned value goes back nearly a millennium.
The continuity of the law is remarkable. To understand why the state has the authority to take this money from a modern corporation, we actually have to trace the concept of escheatment all the way back to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. 1066. This is the exact moment the legal framework was born.
Let's really explore this history deeply because it transforms escheatment from this dry accounting rule into a profound story about human organization and the consolidation of power.
The story begins with William the Conqueror. When he successfully invaded England and defeated the Anglo-Saxon forces in 1066, he didn't just take the political throne, he executed a massive restructuring of property rights. He claimed all the land of England, every forest, every field, every riverbank, as his personal possession under a legal doctrine known as allodial title. He declared himself the sole absolute owner of the physical earth of the kingdom.
So he centralized the very concept of ownership into a single person. No one else truly owned anything, they only borrowed it from him.
That is the essence of the feudal system he established. Now, William obviously could not physically farm, manage, or defend all that land himself.
Right, it's a whole country.
So he granted portions of this vast royal domain to his favorite followers, his most trusted lords, barons, and military commanders. In the legal terminology of the time, these individuals became known as tenants-in-chief.
Tenants-in-chief.
Yes. They entered into a highly formalized feudal contract with the king. They didn't receive absolute ownership. They received an estate in the land. They were, functionally, tenants.
Renters, essentially.
Essentially. And in exchange for the privilege of holding and profiting from this land, they owed the king specific ongoing services. This usually took the form of military service, providing a certain number of knights for a certain number of days, or agricultural yields, or periodic financial payments known as feudal relief.
The concept of holding property was entirely conditional then. It wasn't a static right that you just had. It was an active, ongoing relationship. It was a bond between the sovereign and the tenant, maintained through service.
It was a very strict reciprocal bond, and because the entire kingdom's economy and military defense relied on these bonds, there were absolute rules governing what happened when a bond was broken.
Because things break.
Right. The primary issue was continuity. If a tenant-in-chief died without a legal, recognized heir, the estate, the fief, ceased to exist as a viable legal entity.
Because the person holding the contract is gone.
Exactly. There was no one living who had been formally enfeud or granted that specific plot of land, and therefore there was no one obligated to provide the knights or the crops to the king.
That's a problem for the king.
A huge problem. Alternatively, if a tenant committed a felony, which in the medieval context wasn't just a crime, but a profound disavowal of the feudal bond, a breach of faith and loyalty with the Lord, their legal right to hold the land was immediately terminated.
So the moment the tenant died heirless, or the moment they broke faith, the land was suddenly detached. It was left floating. But as we established earlier, property cannot exist in a void. It couldn't just sit empty.
It could not sit empty because the allodial title, the ultimate ownership, always remained with the king. When the tenant-in-chief was removed from the equation, the land physically and legally fell out of their family's possession.
It fell on.
Yes. It reverted back up the feudal chain to the immediate overlord or directly to the crown. It returned to the royal domain, transformed from an active estate back into a mere tenantless plot of earth, waiting to be reassigned and granted to a new follower.
The phrasing you just used, that it fell out of their possession, this physical description is where the actual word we use today comes from, right?
It is. The etymology is a direct description of the medieval action. The word originates from the Latin term ex cadere, which translates literally to fall away or to fall out.
Ex cadere.
Yes. As the legal language evolved through medieval French, it morphed into the word eschear, and eventually, as it was integrated into English common law, it settled into the term we use today. Escheat.
Escheat.
The tenantless land escheated to the crown. It fell back to the king.
It is such a vivid image to hold in your mind. A 12th century farmer working a plot of land dies without children, and the legal right to that physical acre of soil, the actual dirt he was plowing, falls back into the hands of a Norman king sitting in a castle.
Yeah.
It is a highly physical transfer of value.
And the English monarchy did not leave this transfer to chance. They were incredibly organized and bureaucratic about reclaiming this value.
I'm sure.
They recognized very early on that escheats were a massive, reliable source of revenue for the crown. From the 12th century onward, the monarchy appointed specific, powerful royal officials in every county across the realm.
What were they called?
Their title was simply escheaters.
Escheaters.
Yes. And their singular job was to monitor the local population for deaths, track the genealogies of the tenants-in-chief, and manage the process of reclaiming the escheated land.
But wait, how did a 12th century official actually track and enforce this across a sprawling, pre-digital countryside? The logistics of finding out who died and what they owned seem impossibly complex for that era.
You'd be surprised. The Crown developed a highly specific, legally binding procedure to manage the logistics. Upon receiving word of the death of a tenant-in-chief, the King's Chancery, which was the central administrative office, would issue a formal legal writ to the local county escheator.
A writ?
Yes, a document known as the Writ of Diem Clausit Extremum.
Diem Clausit Extremum. He has closed his last day. It is an incredibly poetic way for a bureaucratic office to state that a citizen has died.
It is poetic, but the poetry masked a very rigorous financial audit. When the escheator received this writ, they were instructed to immediately impanel a local jury.
A jury just for this?
Just for this. This jury would hold an official inquiry, known as an inquisition post-mortem, an investigation after death. The jury was tasked with ascertaining two vital pieces of information.
Okay, what were they looking for?
First, they had to determine if there was a legal heir of age who could inherit the feudal bond. Second, they had to survey and document the exact extent, boundaries, and financial value of the land the deceased had held.
So they were doing a full audit of the estate.
A very rigorous survey. This determined whether the king had the legal right to reclaim the land. The sources emphasize that the king's primary directive to the escheaters was to ensure that not a single day's worth of agricultural or financial revenue was lost during the transition.
Not a single day.
Not one day. If there was any doubt regarding the heirs, or if a dispute arose, the escheator had the authority to physically seize the land, lock it down, and hold its revenues until the royal courts in London could definitively sort out the ownership.
Wow. When you lay out that 12th century system, a sovereign king appointing county officials, issuing Latin writs, and impaneling juries specifically to reclaim tenantless farming plots so that the revenue doesn't sit idle, and then you hold that exact system up against the scenario of an unredeemed digital gift card sitting in a corporate server database today. The parallel is astonishing.
It really is.
The absolute core philosophical idea has survived an entire millennium intact. Property, whether it's a physical acre of rain-soaked soil in medieval England or a string of encrypted binary code representing an uncashed paycheck in a modern accounting ledger, it cannot exist without an owner. The system will not allow value to be left in the void. It must fall back to the sovereign.
It is one of the most beautiful examples of continuity in human legal organization. The mechanism of the state reclaiming the void has survived perfectly. However, the justification for why the state takes it has fundamentally evolved.
Right, because we don't have a king.
Exactly. We do not live under a feudal monarchy. The modern state does not claim this abandoned property by royal prerogative or divine right.
The philosophy had to shift to survive the transition into a democratic republic. How did escheatment evolve into the modern American legal framework?
The evolution occurred through a broader concept in English common law known as bona vacantia, which translates to unowned goods or vacant property. Over several centuries, the underlying philosophy slowly shifted.
Shifted away from what?
It moved away from the idea of personally enriching the crown's coffers and toward the idea of serving a broader social purpose. In modern American law, the power of escheatment is justified entirely by public policy and the collective good.
The collective good.
Yes. This shift was crystallized in a pivotal 1951 Supreme Court case, Standard Oil Company v. New Jersey.
What happened in that case?
The court laid out the modern principle, stating that unclaimed and abandoned assets should be, quote, used for the general good rather than for the chance enrichment of particular individuals or organizations.
That ruling represents a profound philosophical pivot. It takes a system originally designed to protect the centralized wealth of a single monarch and repurposes it to prevent a random private corporation from receiving an accidental financial windfall simply because an ordinary person forgot to cash a check.
The logic is rooted entirely in equity. The company did not earn that extra money, they only have it because a mistake was made or a memory failed.
Right.
If the money is truly lost to the individual, public policy dictates it should not randomly enrich the private shareholders of the company holding it. It should escheat to the state. And once the state holds it, the funds are held in perpetuity so they can either be claimed by the rightful owner if they ever realize their mistake, or, in the meantime, the value can be put to work serving the general public.
So we have traced the history from Norman Fields to modern public policy. The philosophical groundwork is very clear.
Right.
But how does this translate into action today? Like, how does a forgotten $20 vendor check from a local business actually transform into property held by the state treasury?
It's quite a journey.
The sources we are working with, particularly the California State Controller's Holder Handbook and the Eisenblog's detailed breakdown of varying state laws, provide us with an incredibly granular look at the modern bureaucracy of forgetting.
Granular is the perfect word. The modern system is a massive, highly regulated, and deeply bureaucratic apparatus. It does not operate on vague assumptions. It operates on very strict statutory timelines.
Timelines.
Yes. The entire process of escheatment begins with a metric known as the dormancy period.
The dormancy period. Looking at it through the lens of our earlier discussion, this is essentially the codified timeline of forgetting.
A timeline of forgetting is a very accurate way to frame it. The dormancy period is the specific, legally mandated amount of time that society, acting through its state legislatures, is willing to wait in silence before officially declaring a piece of property forgotten or abandoned.
And when does that clock start ticking?
The clock on this dormancy period starts ticking on the exact date of the last known activity generated by the owner. It is measured from the last time the individual logged into their online account, the day they cashed a previous check, or the last time they actively corresponded with the financial institution holding the funds.
So any sign of life.
Any sign of life resets it. The moment the owner stops interacting completely, the clock begins.
I am looking at the California Holder Handbook's tables, and it is striking how these dormancy periods are not uniform across the board. Like, the state does not apply a blanket 5-year rule to everything.
No, not at all.
The timelines vary drastically depending on the specific type of asset that has been left behind. It almost feels as though the state is attempting to reverse engineer human psychology based on what exactly was lost.
The variations in the dormancy periods are perhaps the most fascinating psychological aspect of the legislation. The laws are built on assumptions about how human beings interact with different types of value.
Give me an example.
Let's look at the California rules, as they provide a fairly representative model for the rest of the country, for wages, salaries, and commissions. So, the uncashed paycheck we discussed earlier, the dormancy period is set at only 1 year.
1 year is a remarkably short window compared to the timelines for other assets in this handbook.
The brevity is intentional, and the statutory logic is really sound. People rely on their regular wages for daily survival. Rent, groceries, transportation, these are all funded by the paycheck.
Right, it's immediate needs.
Exactly. If an entire year passes and an individual has not claimed a paycheck they earned, it provides a very strong, nearly irrefutable indicator that something has significantly disrupted their normal life.
They didn't just forget.
Right. They have likely lost track of it during a chaotic move, or perhaps they have passed away. A rational person does not intentionally leave a necessary paycheck sitting uncashed in a drawer for 5 years as a saving strategy.
No, they don't.
Because the behavioral deviation is so clear, the state intervenes quickly, stepping in after just 12 months to secure those funds from the employer's ledger.
The short timeline is a direct reaction to the urgency of the asset. So what happens when we look at assets designed for storage, like bank accounts?
For standard checking accounts, savings accounts, and the physical contents of safe deposit boxes, the dormancy period is typically extended to 3 years.
3 years.
Yes. A bank account is designed for holding value, so a lack of immediate activity isn't as glaring a red flag as an uncashed paycheck. The state provides a 3-year window of absolute silence. No deposits made, no withdrawals taken, no checks cleared, not a single login to the digital banking portal before legally declaring the account dormant and abandoned.
The state assumes a wider margin of error for saved money versus earned money. And as you move through the asset classes, the timelines stretch even further.
They do. Many general miscellaneous assets, like utility deposits or credit balances, default to a 5-year dormancy period. But the psychological profiling becomes most evident when you look at life insurance policies.
Oh, this one is heavy.
It is. The dormancy period for life insurance proceeds is generally set at 7 years after the policy matures or becomes payable upon death.
A 7-year wait. When you consider the context of life insurance, that extended timeline makes profound emotional sense. The circumstances surrounding a life insurance payout are inherently complex and often deeply traumatic.
Incredibly traumatic.
Beneficiaries might not even be aware that a policy exists until years after a family member has passed away. The paperwork might be buried in a safety deposit box or an old filing cabinet.
The system is designed specifically to accommodate the reality of that trauma. The 7-year timeline builds in extra space for the fog of grief, the slow, complex process of settling an estate, and the delayed discovery of hidden documents.
It's giving them time.
Exactly. The state recognizes that silence from a life insurance beneficiary does not mean they have abandoned the money. It often simply means they do not yet know it is there. And then at the farthest end of the spectrum, we find the rules for traveler's checks.
Oh, traveler's checks.
The dormancy period for an uncashed traveler's check is an astonishing 15 years.
15 years of waiting before the state steps in. That is an incredible amount of patience from a bureaucratic system.
The 15-year timeline is a direct reflection of the unique nature of the product. Traveler's checks were historically purchased as a form of ultra-secure emergency funds.
Right, for trips.
People would buy them and hold them for years, tucking them into the back flap of a passport holder or a fireproof safe, waiting for that someday trip to Europe, or a sudden emergency that gets endlessly delayed.
So this was to sit there.
Exactly. The law recognizes that holding a traveler's check in complete silence for a decade is actually its intended use. Therefore, the dormancy clock is set to 15 years to ensure the state isn't prematurely seizing money that the owner believes is safely tucked away for the future.
So we understand the ticking clocks, the 1 year, 3 year, 7 year, and 15-year countdowns. Let us walk through the actual execution of the process.
Okay.
Imagine a company has an uncashed vendor check on its ledger. The clock has been ticking, and it finally hits that 3-year dormancy mark. What happens next? Does the corporate accounting department just quietly wire the money over to the state treasury and close the book?
The process is anything but quiet. The law strictly forbids companies from simply handing the money over in silence.
They have to say something.
Before a single dollar can be transferred to the state, the holding company is legally required to perform an exhaustive process known as due diligence. They cannot merely accept the silence. They are mandated to actively try and break it.
They have to try to wake the owner up. What does that due diligence look like in practice? Because the administrative burden on a massive corporation must be immense if they are dealing with thousands of forgotten accounts.
The administrative infrastructure required is vast. First, companies are legally bound to retain detailed records of their customers and payees for extensive periods, often up to 10 years after a transaction, specifically to maintain an audit trail for unclaimed property.
So they have to know who to look for.
They must know who the money belongs to. When an account or an uncashed check nears the end of its specific dormancy period, usually triggering a requirement between 6 to 12 months before the final escheatment deadline, the company must execute a due diligence mailing campaign.
A mailing campaign.
Yes. They are legally required to physically print and mail a formal notice to the last known address they have on file for the owner. This letter serves as a final warning, explicitly stating that the owner's property is inactive and is scheduled to be legally transferred to the state unless the owner contacts the company immediately.
It is a final, physical attempt to pierce through the momentum of the owner's life and get their attention.
And for certain highly regulated industries, the due diligence requirements go far beyond just sending a letter.
Like which industries?
Life insurance companies, for instance, operate under intense scrutiny. They are expected to regularly and proactively cross-reference their massive databases of policyholder records against the Social Security Administration's Death Master file.
The Death Master file.
Yes. The law requires them to actively search for deceased policyholders rather than passively waiting for a grieving beneficiary to figure it out and file a claim. If they find a match in the Death Master file, the dormancy clock starts, and the due diligence process to find the heirs begins.
So they are actively investigating. Let's assume the company does everything right. They check the databases, they mail the required letters to the last known addresses, but the letters bounce back, stamped, return to sender.
That happens often.
The emails, if they have them, bounce back as undeliverable. The phone numbers are disconnected. The silence remains unbroken. What is the actual mechanical procedure for moving the funds from the corporate ledger to the state?
Our source material from the California State Controller's Office outlines a meticulous, highly structured procedure known as the two-report process.
The two-report process?
Yes. This is a standard model adopted by many states to manage the flow of data and money. The handover does not happen in a single chaotic data dump. It is carefully staged over several months.
Let's dissect the two stages. What is the first step the company takes?
The first stage typically occurs in the fall, with a strict deadline often set right before November 1st. The holding company must submit what is legally termed a notice report.
Okay, a notice report.
This report does not involve the transfer of any actual money. It is entirely an exchange of information. The company compiles a massive data file containing the names, last known addresses, social security numbers, dates of last contact, and the specific monetary value of every single asset that has reached the end of its dormancy period.
That is a lot of sensitive data.
Extremely sensitive. Because of that, the file must be heavily encrypted and formatted to a rigorous national standard known as NAUPA. The company transmits this encrypted data file to the state controller's office.
Why does the state demand all this encrypted information months before they actually collect the money? It seems like an unnecessary delay in the transfer.
The delay is a deliberate consumer protection mechanism. The state wants the information early because the state intends to try finding the owner as well.
Oh, I see.
Once the state controller receives the notice report and processes the NEGPA, the SEC data, the state launches its own wave of communication. They send out official state notices to the last known addresses, essentially telling the citizen, we have been informed by a corporation that your property is about to escheat to our treasury. You have a few months left. Contact the holding company immediately to claim your funds before they are transferred.
It is a redundant safety net. If you ignore the letter from the corporation, perhaps a letter bearing the seal of the state controller will catch your attention.
Exactly.
And after that window closes.
After that final grace period expires, we enter the second stage. This occurs in the following summer, usually mandated between June 1st and June 15th. The company must now submit the remit report.
REWIT report.
Right. By this point in the timeline, any owners who were successfully woken up by the letters have contacted the company and been paid out directly. Whatever balances remain on the ledger represent the truly abandoned, unreachable property. The company must now remit or formally transfer those remaining funds to the state.
The actual movement of the money. In an era before digital banking, I imagine this involved companies mailing thousands of physical checks to the state capitol. How is it handled now?
The state treasuries have zero desire to process thousands of physical paper checks from corporations. The administrative backlog would be catastrophic.
It would be a nightmare.
Therefore, modern statutes mandate digital compliance. For remittance amounts over $2,000, California and many other states legally require that the funds be transferred via electronic funds transfer, or EFT.
Instant transfer.
Yes. The money must be wired directly, securely, and instantly into the state's designated accounts. The state requires clean data and secure transfers. If a corporation fails to utilize EFT for these large amounts and attempts to mail a physical check, they are penalized, often hit with a 2% fine on the total amount simply for non-compliance with the transfer method.
Listening to the granular details of this system, the NUPA 2 encryption standards, the staggered 2 report timelines, the EFT mandates, the statutory due diligence mailings, it sounds like an incredible amount of administrative infrastructure being maintained just to handle what one might assume are a few stray, forgotten accounts.
It sounds excessive until you look at the numbers.
Right. Because when we look at the data provided in our sources, it becomes immediately apparent why this massive infrastructure is necessary. The scale of the forgetting is almost incomprehensible.
The scale is staggering. It moves the conversation from a niche accounting anomaly into a universal human phenomenon. We have the fiscal year 2024 annual report published by NUPA, the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators.
What does it say?
Their collected data pulls back the curtain on the true, immense size of this shadow economy of inertia.
There's a specific statistic in the NUPA report that shifts the entire perspective. 1 in 7 Americans.
1 in 7.
1 in 7 Americans currently has unclaimed property sitting in a state vault somewhere waiting for them. It is not a fringe occurrence. It is a nearly universal experience of modern economic life.
And the dollar amounts flowing through the system directly reflect that massive volume of people. According to the NWPA data, in fiscal year 2024 alone, state unclaimed property programs successfully returned a total of $4.49 billion to rightful owners.
$4.49 billion paid out in a single 12-month period.
And we must remember that $4.49 billion figure is only what was successfully returned.
Oh, wow.
That number does not account for the billions upon billions of dollars that are still being held in the state accounts waiting to be claimed. Furthermore, the individual amounts being forgotten are not trivial.
Right, because when people hear forgotten money, they often picture, a $2 rebate check from a hardware store or 50 cents of accumulated interest in an old savings account.
That's the assumption. But the NWPA report reveals that the average claim paid out last year was $2,080.
$2,000.
The median claim was $100. People are routinely losing track of highly significant sums of money.
If the individual amounts are that high and the aggregate total is measured in the billions of dollars flowing into state coffers every single year, it introduces a massive logistical and, frankly, political tension into the system.
It absolutely does.
There are billions of dollars moving from corporate ledgers to state treasuries. Who gets to hold the money when the owner truly cannot be found? The geography of modern finance is complicated. If you live in Pennsylvania and you buy a digital money order from a company that is legally incorporated in Delaware, and that money order is abandoned, whose state vault does it actually go into?
It's a great question.
The system seems to require a mechanism to resolve geographic disputes over this windfall.
You have identified the exact fault line that fractures the system at the state level. That scenario is not a hypothetical thought experiment. It is the precise basis of an incredibly bitter, high-stakes legal battle between sovereign states.
A battle that escalated all the way to the United States Supreme Court in 2023.
Yeah.
This brings us to the most legally dense source in our stack, the Supreme Court case of Delaware v. Pennsylvania.
Officially cited as Delaware v. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, 598 U.S. 115. This case is a masterclass in the complexities of escheatment because it strips away the consumer narrative and highlights just how much raw financial power is at stake for the states themselves.
It's just about the money at that point.
It is. This case is also historically notable because it featured Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's very first majority opinion since joining the Supreme Court, and it marked the first time the court had agreed to hear an unclaimed property dispute in over 30 years.
To understand why Pennsylvania and Wisconsin were effectively suing Delaware over abandoned money, we need to lay out the ground rules.
Yeah.
How did the legal system traditionally decide which state gets to claim a lost asset?
The rules governing this are known as the rules of default. Decades ago, in a 1965 case called Texas v. New Jersey, the Supreme Court established a set of common law rules to prevent states from endlessly fighting over the same abandoned property.
Look.
They created a two-tiered system. The first tier is the primary rule, and it serves as the default standard. The primary rule is highly logical. Abandoned funds escheat to the state of the creditor's last known address, exactly as it is recorded on the holding company's books.
So if the company's ledger shows that the person who lost the money lived in Pennsylvania, the money goes to the Pennsylvania State Treasury.
Exactly.
That seems entirely equitable. It ensures the abandoned value remains geographically close to where the person actually resided, increasing the chances they might find it through local state outreach programs.
The primary rule works perfectly when the data is complete, but the Supreme Court had to account for incomplete data, which necessitated a secondary rule.
Right.
What happens when the company holding the abandoned funds does not know the owner's address? What if the corporate records are destroyed, incomplete? Or, more importantly, what if the financial product purchased did not require the consumer to provide an address in the first place?
I can see how that happens. If you walk into a corner pharmacy to buy a $50 money order to pay a repairman, you hand the cashier $50 in cash. They hand you the paper money order. You do not hand them your driver's license, and they do not log your home address into a database. The transaction is anonymous.
Exactly. The company issuing the money order knows they sold it, and they know if it hasn't been cashed, but they have absolutely no idea where the purchaser lives.
So what does the law do?
In these specific cases, where the last known address is completely unknown, the Supreme Court's secondary rule dictates that the right to claim the abandoned property defaults to the holding company's state of incorporation.
And that specific legal pivot, defaulting to the state of incorporation, is where the state of Delaware enters the narrative and completely dominates the system.
Delaware's role in American corporate law creates a massive asymmetry in this process. As outlined in the historical background of the case, Delaware is the legal home to over 2 million registered businesses. Yes. A vast majority of the largest publicly traded companies, and specifically massive financial services corporations, choose to incorporate in Delaware due to its highly favorable corporate tax structures, its specialized court of chancery, and its established legal precedents.
So let's trace the logic. You have a massive nationwide financial services company. They issue millions of financial instruments like money orders or prepaid cards across all 50 states. By the nature of the product, they do not collect the addresses of the purchasers.
Right.
A certain percentage of those millions of instruments will inevitably be abandoned. Because the addresses are unknown, the primary rule fails. The secondary rule kicks in. The money defaults to the state of incorporation.
Yes.
And because the company is incorporated in Delaware, Delaware gets all of it.
Delaware receives the entirety of the abandoned funds, and the scale of this windfall is almost difficult to comprehend. The state of Delaware leveraged the escheatment of these unknown address assets, uncashed vendor checks, abandoned gift cards, unredeemed money orders into an economic engine.
An economic engine.
Escheatment became Delaware's third largest source of revenue.
I want to make sure that point lands properly. Gathering the loose change of forgotten money from across the entire country became the third largest source of funding for the state government of Delaware.
According to financial analyses at the time, roughly 10% of Delaware's total incoming state funds were derived purely from the escheatment of abandoned property.
10% of the whole state's budget.
We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into Delaware's coffers every single year, generated by economic activity that occurred far outside its borders.
It is entirely understandable why the other 49 states looked at this arrangement with profound hostility. The treasurers in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin saw their own citizens walking into local stores, spending locally earned wages to buy money orders, and accidentally losing them.
Right, the money was spent locally.
The economic activity happened in their towns, but due to a quirk in corporate record-keeping, all the residual value was being siphoned off to Delaware. It represents a massive drain of capital from the rest of the country.
The other states were acutely aware of the drain. In fact, they had tried to fight it before. Back in 1972, in a case called Pennsylvania v. New York, the states challenged a similar situation involving Western Union money orders.
What does the court say then?
They argued the common law rules were unfair. However, the Supreme Court refused to alter the primary and secondary rules, essentially concluding that trying to invent a new system for every type of financial product was too legally complex, and it was better to stick to established precedent. They deferred the problem.
But the problem was too large to ignore, so the legislative branch had to intervene. Congress stepped in to override the Supreme Court's default rules.
Congress recognized that the Supreme Court's secondary rule, when applied to mass-market anonymous financial products, was creating an incredibly inequitable distribution of state resources.
It was too lopsided.
It was funneling a massive, unjustified windfall to a few states of incorporation at the direct expense of the states where the money was actually spent. To fix this, Congress drafted and passed a specific law called the Disposition of Abandoned Money Orders and Travelers' Check Act.
Quite a title.
Yes. In legal circles, it is simply referred to as the Federal Disposition Act, or the FDA.
What exact mechanism did the FDA change to stop the flow of money to Delaware?
The FDA did not rewrite the entire common law system. It carved out a highly specific exception. The law stated that for money orders, traveler's checks, and other similar written instruments, the common law rules no longer applied.
Okay, so they pulled them out of the rule book.
Yes. For these specific items, as a matter of equity, the right to escheat the abandoned funds would go to the state where the instrument was physically purchased, regardless of whether the buyer's address was known, and regardless of where the issuing company was incorporated.
If you bought it in Pennsylvania, the abandoned money stays in Pennsylvania.
Exactly.
That seems to solve the problem cleanly. But legal language is rarely simple, which brings us directly to the arguments in the 2023 Supreme Court case. The dispute wasn't over whether the FDA was valid. The dispute was over what exactly counted as a similar written instrument.
Precisely. The core of the legal battle centered around a Delaware-incorporated company called MoneyGram. MoneyGram is a massive global money transfer and payment services business. They sell a variety of products.
Right.
The states were not arguing over standard retail money orders. They were arguing over two very specific MoneyGram products known as agent checks and teller's checks.
How do these differ from the standard money order you buy at the grocery store?
Standard retail money orders are simple. You hand the cashier cash, they print the amount on the paper, and you, the purchaser, write in the name of the person you are paying. Agent checks and teller's checks are more formal.
More formal how?
They are official checks sold primarily by financial institutions like local banks or credit unions on behalf of MoneyGram. Often, the bank employee signs the check and prints the payee's name directly onto the instrument.
Okay, I see.
The plaintiff states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and roughly 24 others, argued that despite the different names and the bank teller's signature, these products functioned identically to money orders.
So they should fall under the FDA.
Right. They argued they were similar written instruments under the FDA, and the hundreds of millions of dollars in abandoned teller's checks should escheat to the states where they were purchased.
And Delaware, standing to lose hundreds of millions of dollars if that interpretation held, fought back aggressively. What was their defense?
Delaware's legal team argued that teller's checks and agent checks were fundamentally different legal instruments than money orders. They argued these products were a matter of traditional common law, not covered by the FDA's specific carve-out.
Because they're checks, not money orders.
Right. Because the purchaser addresses for these checks were frequently unrecorded by the banks, Delaware insisted the secondary rule applied, meaning the money defaulted to them as the state of incorporation.
That's a clever argument.
To bolster this, Delaware leaned heavily on a very specific, highly technical exclusion written into the FDA itself. The FDA explicitly stated that its rules did not apply to third-party bank checks.
How?
Delaware argued that because these tellers' checks were often signed and issued by local banks acting as agents, they legally qualified as exempted third-party bank checks.
This is where the legal proceedings become incredibly intricate, involving changing opinions and specialized court officers. When states sue each other directly, they don't go to a lower court, they go straight to the Supreme Court under its original jurisdiction.
Yes. Because the Supreme Court does not hold trials or collect evidence itself, in cases of original jurisdiction, they appoint a special master to act effectively as a trial judge.
A special
The court appointed Special Master Pierre N. Lavelle, a highly respected senior judge, to investigate the financial products, hear the arguments, and make a formal recommendation to the justices.
And the special master's investigation produced a very rare legal pivot, didn't it?
It was a remarkably unusual sequence of events. After his initial investigation, Special Master Lavelle issued his first interim report. In that report, he sided with Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
He ruled that MoneyGram's agent checks and teller's checks were covered by the FDA, meaning Delaware would lose the money. However, Delaware filed a fierce exception to this report.
They didn't back down.
Not at all. They argued that the special master's broad reading of the statute was dangerous, claiming it would accidentally sweep in thousands of other standard bank products that Congress never intended to regulate under the FDA.
Delaware pushed back hard, and the special master actually reversed his own decision.
He did. It is a striking moment of judicial humility and complex legal maneuvering. After hearing further oral arguments and reviewing Delaware's exceptions, Special Master Lavelle issued a second interim report.
Reversing himself entirely.
In this document, he formally apologized to the Supreme Court justices. He stated that upon deeper reflection, he could no longer subscribe to his original recommendation. He concluded that because a significant portion of the disputed teller's checks were technically drawn by a bank, they might indeed fall within the FDA's third-party bank check exclusion.
So he recommended Delaware keep the money.
He reversed his position, recommending that Delaware should keep the money.
A stunning reversal. But a special master only provides a recommendation. The Supreme Court justices have the final binding authority. How did they resolve this contradictory mess?
The Supreme Court took the case and scrutinized the actual intent of the law. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote the unanimous majority opinion for the relevant section regarding the FDA.
And what did she write?
The court bypassed the technical labeling of the checks and dug deeply into the legislative history of the 1970s statute. They noted that the Treasury Department had originally requested the third-party bank check exclusion as a minor precautionary change.
Precautionary for what?
The Treasury just wanted to make sure standard, everyday personal checks processed by banks didn't accidentally get swept up in the money order rules. The court ruled that the phrase third-party bank check was legally amorphous, but the intent of Congress was crystal clear.
The intent mattered more than the label.
Congress enacted the FDA specifically to prevent the inequitable windfall of anonymous prepaid instruments flowing to a single state of incorporation.
So the court looked at the reality of the transaction rather than the title on the paper. They essentially concluded, if this product operates exactly like a money order, and if it creates the exact same geographic inequity that Congress drafted this law to fix, then it is covered by the law.
That was the heart of the ruling. The court held unanimously that the abandoned MoneyGram agent checks and teller's checks were sufficiently similar to money orders in their function and their record-keeping gaps to fall under the FDA's other similar written instrument category.
The final hammer falls.
Yeah.
Delaware loses the argument.
Delaware lost the liability phase of this massive case. The financial implications were immediate and staggering. Following the ruling, Pennsylvania State Treasurer Stacey Garrity released a statement applauding the Supreme Court for rejecting Delaware's attempt to secure an unfair windfall.
How much money was actually on the line?
Initial estimates suggested that due to this single ruling interpreting the definition of a check, Delaware might owe up to $400 million in backlogged escheatment funds to the coalition of plaintiff states.
$400 million shifting across state lines, simply because of how the highest court in the land defined the function of an uncashed piece of paper. It underscores the incredible weight of the machinery we are discussing.
It really does.
We have spent this time looking closely at the macro level of the system. The Supreme Court justices parsing legislative intent, the state treasurers calculating hundreds of millions in shifted revenue, the rigid corporate accounting protocols, the NWPA encryption standards.
Right.
When you are looking at it from that altitude, it is very easy to get lost in the sheer bureaucracy of it all.
It is entirely possible to view achievement simply as a massive impersonal financial apparatus, a machine that processes data and dollars without any connection to the people generating it.
But I want to consciously pivot our perspective here. I want to pull away from the courtrooms and the ledgers and ground this back where we started, with the individual.
Okay.
Because beneath all this legal infrastructure, beneath the Supreme Court rulings and the statutory dormancy periods, lies a deeply human pattern of behavior. When we talk colloquially about leaving money behind or forgetting an asset, there's often a subtle, unspoken implication of irresponsibility.
A judgment? Sort of.
Yes, there's a quiet societal judgment that if an individual loses track of a $1,000 final paycheck or fails to claim a life insurance payout, they must be inherently careless. They must be financially disorganized or negligent.
It is often internalized as a personal failing. It feels like a failure of personal accounting, a mistake that a responsible person would not make.
I think the sources we've reviewed actually dismantle that judgment completely. If we look closely at when this forgetting actually occurs in a person's life, it reframes the entire behavior.
How so?
Leaving money behind in these systems is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of responsibility. Think back to the specific dormancy periods we analyzed. When does an employee actually leave a final paycheck uncashed?
During a move.
It almost exclusively happens during a major move.
Yeah.
And relocating to a new city or state is one of life's most intense, cognitively demanding transitions. You are navigating the logistics of a new job, securing new housing, managing the sheer physical exhaustion of packing your entire existence into cardboard boxes.
It's overwhelming.
Your focus, your entire cognitive bandwidth is saturated by the immediate demands of the future. In that forward-moving momentum, an uncashed paper check mailed from the old life simply slips into the margins. It falls off the radar because the radar is full.
The attention is not failing. It is simply deployed elsewhere to manage a transition. The friction of the move causes the asset to drop.
Exactly. And the pattern holds true across other assets. Look at the life insurance policies. Why does a substantial policy go unclaimed for 7 years?
Because of the grief.
It doesn't happen because a family is careless with money. It happens because the payout is triggered in the wake of sudden death. It happens in the deep, disorienting fog of profound grief when a family is trying to plan a funeral, comfort surviving children, and simply endure the emotional shock of the loss.
Finding the paperwork is the last thing on their minds.
Right. A piece of paper detailing a financial policy might be buried in a filing cabinet they don't even know exists because searching for financial documents is not their priority. Or consider the safe deposit box that sits dormant for 3 long years.
That abandonment often occurs as people age.
As they age, as their daily routines fundamentally change, as physical mobility decreases, or as cognitive sharpness begins to fade.
You're describing the inevitable friction points of being alive. These moments of loss are not the result of apathy.
No, they are the byproduct of living a complicated, messy, deeply demanding life. We drop things when we are carrying heavy emotional or logistical loads, recognizing that truth removes the shame from the pattern of forgotten money. It makes the behavior entirely understandable.
It reframes the human behavior perfectly. It views the forgetting not as a mistake that needs to be punished, but as a reality that needs to be accommodated by the structures around us. And that realization is exactly what the escheatment system, functioning at its absolute best, is attempting to do.
It accommodates us.
It is a legal apparatus designed to accommodate our humanity.
Which brings us to a surprisingly uplifting aspect of this deep dive. Because while the state is holding this money, while the Treasury is accommodating our collective forgetfulness, that massive pool of value isn't just sitting idle in a dark vault, gathering dust and depreciating.
It is not idle at all. The state puts the inertia to work. This represents the collective good that can emerge from individual forgetfulness. Our source material from the UPCR, an overview titled Giving Thanks, Giving Back, details exactly what happens to these billions of dollars while they wait in the state accounts for their rightful owners to return.
And it is crucial to reiterate the core legal principle here. The original owner, or their heirs, always retains the legal right to claim the full, exact value of their abandoned property. The state does not steal the principal.
Never.
But in the meantime, while the property is dormant, the state utilizes the aggregate power of those funds.
Yes. While maintaining the liability to pay out claims, many states utilize the massive interest generated by these pooled accounts and sometimes portions of the principal itself to fund essential foundational public programs.
And when you look at the state-by-state breakdown, public education is one of the most common and significant beneficiaries of this system.
It's a huge source of funding.
I found this section of the source material genuinely inspiring. The idea that a forgotten utility deposit from an apartment rental in Florida eventually end up directly supporting a public school classroom.
It is a direct pipeline. In Florida, the state legislature mandates that a significant portion of the proceeds generated from the Unclaimed Property Fund goes directly into the state school trust fund, supplementing the education budget.
That's wonderful.
Wisconsin employs a similar strategy. They direct their unclaimed and escheated property revenues into their school trust funds, which are specifically designated to sustain public school libraries, provide educational materials, and support statewide learning resources.
And Oregon has built an entire framework around this.
Yes, Oregon directs its unclaimed property dollars directly into the state's Common School Fund. This fund supports K through 12 education across the entire state, covering everything from physical classroom materials to broad district-level educational programs.
They even have a dashboard for it.
They do. Oregon takes it a step further in terms of civic engagement. They maintain a public transparency dashboard online so citizens can track the escheatment revenues and see exactly how those forgotten funds are being invested back into their local schools.
The impact extends far beyond education, though. These funds touch almost every vital aspect of civic infrastructure.
They permeate the public sector. In Massachusetts, unclaimed property revenue is channeled into the state's general fund, which provides broad support for essential services, including transportation improvements and public health initiatives.
New York does something similar, right?
New York utilizes the interest generated by their massive unclaimed funds pool to strengthen their general fund as well, indirectly supporting critical infrastructure upgrades, emergency response services, and the vast transit systems that keep the state moving.
And Texas and California.
Texas has utilized surplus funds from their unclaimed property program to directly contribute to specialized veterans initiatives. California applies the interest to support broad community services across its counties.
It creates this beautiful, entirely unseen relational web between the individual and the collective.
It really does.
A citizen is overwhelmed by a cross-country move and loses track of a $200 vendor check. They forget it entirely. But that $200 doesn't just enrich a random corporation. It flows into a state pool that helps pave the highway they drive onto their new job, or buys library books for the elementary school down the street, or supports a financial literacy program for veterans in their state.
It's still working for them.
Their accidentally lost value continues to serve their neighbors and their community until the very day they finally realize it is gone and come back to claim it.
It functions as a profound, almost accidental form of civic stewardship. And the most vital part of the system is that it actively wants to close the loop. The state is not a black hole. It isn't just taking the money and hiding it behind bureaucratic walls.
The state programs actively want to reunite people with their property.
Because beyond funding roads and schools, the system is designed to protect legacy. When you consider the life insurance payouts and the dormant safe deposit boxes, this system protects families from losing their generational legacy simply because a paperwork trail went cold during a difficult, traumatic time.
And to facilitate that final reconnection, the system has built centralized technological tools, most notably portals like missingmoney.com.
Our sources note that this platform was established in 1999 as a joint cooperative effort between the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators and a private financial service provider.
Who runs it now?
Today, it is operated by Kelmar Associates, and it represents a unified, centralized search hub for 49 participating U.S. states, alongside Puerto Rico and the Canadian province of Alberta.
It is a completely free database for the public. There are no paywalls, no advertisements, no hidden fees. It exists purely to heal the disconnect caused by the friction of living. You type in your name, or the name of a grandparent, and the vast machinery we spent the last hour discussing reaches out across the servers to hand you back what you dropped in the margins all those years ago.
In many ways, that search bar is the modern technological fulfillment of that 12th century escheator's job. Finding the lost heir, confirming the bounds of the estate, and restoring the rightful balance of ownership.
It is a remarkable journey we've taken through the sources today. We started by looking back almost 1,000 years to a Norman king claiming tenantless, rain-swept land across the English countryside to consolidate his tower. We watched that ancient feudal impulse slowly evolve into the careful, highly regulated administration of a lost final paycheck, guided by modern state handbooks, encrypted NOUPA files, and statutory due diligence letters.
A lot of evolution.
We explored the billion-dollar battles fought between sovereign states in the halls of the Supreme Court, arguing over the default rules of equity, the definition of bank check, and the incredible windfall of corporate incorporation. Right. And we arrived, ultimately, at the public good. The school libraries, the paved roads, the veterans programs, quietly funded by our collective, understandable, and deeply human forgetfulness.
It's quite a system.
There is a quiet comfort in knowing that in a world that feels incredibly fast, a world that demands our constant attention and seems so prone to leaving us behind the moment we look away, there is a quiet, invisible machinery built beneath it all. A machinery designed entirely to hold our place, to wait for us, and to keep our values safe until we are ready to claim it. Same pace, same questions. See you then.